Good morning. Alrighty, so here's what we've got going is Proverbs chapter 30. We really slowed down here. That wasn't my intent. And we're going to start in verse 15. The leech has two daughters. Give and give. So, and those are demands, right? They're not giving and giving. It's someone who's a leech. Gimme, 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 gimme. There's a lot of people like that today, are there not? It's funny how I just have a personal experience recently. I don't want to necessarily share the specifics, but it's fascinating to see, people in all these different views and opinions. And you find one group of people saying, oh, well, that's outrageous. I can't believe that. It's like, we deserve better. We deserve more. And then there's another group of people going like, actually, that looks quite fair. And so it's funny because I joked with someone, I was just making the comment. It's like, yeah, there's the people who've actually weighed out the options and have actually looked into it. And then there's the people who are just kind of clueless and all they can think about is gimme, gimme, gimme. So yeah, that's the way people think these days quite often, is they just want people to gimme, gimme, gimme. There are three things that are never satisfied. Four never say enough. The grave, the barren womb, the earth that is not satisfied with water, and the fire never says enough. Ooh. So just that gimme, gimme, it's kind of equating it to. Now, you'll notice, though, this idea that these aren't good things. Just like it's not good for us to be saying gimme, gimme, gimme. Obviously, the grave, that's grim. And the barren womb, it's grim. And sometimes we wonder why, why miscarriages? Why this? But that's the idea, is that this gimme, gimme, gimme is just like, so it's tying that thought into unpleasant things. And so the earth that's not satisfied with water, the idea is like that, you don't have enough water to get the crops going. And no matter what, it just seems like it's still dry and we need more water. So it's not satisfied. And then fire, which just burns and burns and burns. So, and good morning to you guys. The eye that mocks his father and scorns obedience to his mother. More things. The ravens of the valley will pick it out, and the young eagles will eat it. Bum, bum, bum. So again, more of these Proverbs. Again, these are not Proverbs of Solomon. These are Proverbs of Agur. But it's just talking about someone who mocks his parents, that it's going to come around and get them in the end. There are three things which are too wonderful for me. Yes, four which I do not understand. And if you haven't caught on to this yet today, this is part of a Hebrew poetic structure. There are 6 things the Lord hates, yea, 7 are an abomination. And that's the idea, is you give a list, and then there's that final thing that is the greatest of them all. The idea of the unquenchable fire, that's one. Like once that fire is going, it just eats everything in its path. So here it says 3 things that are wonderful. The way of an eagle in the air, the way of a serpent on the rock, the way of a ship in the midst of the sea, and the way of a man with a virgin. That's like Song of Solomon, type stuff right there, censored for young ears. But the idea there is just the majesty of an eagle in the air. And then again, like you see the air, the land, the sea, right? He's covering all 3 of those bases. And so obviously the eagle soaring in the air is very majestic, and just watching it float up there. And then the way of a snake. And the idea there is, I think, of all the animals on the land, I think we kind of get how the ones with legs work, right? It makes sense. The antelope and the goat, going up a hillside, those are impressive. But then watching a snake, as it almost just kind of glides along the ground with no legs at all, it's this idea like, whoa, watch that and how it works. And then the ship in the midst of the sea. And this, once again, just the idea of back then, the sea was this untamable force. And so to see a ship sailing through the sea, but finally it's the way of a man with a virgin. And the idea here is it's a wedding night. It's a physical intimacy. And the idea behind that is just something of the majesty, the wonder, and the beauty behind sexual intercourse, which God designed. It's, what was it? There was something else recently. And it's one of those things where I always make the comment like, well, why not talk about it here at church? Because where else should we talk about these things? If we're talking about it here at church, then hopefully we're going to be respectful and we're going to be, not being dirty in any way. But that's the idea, is God made sex. It's not supposed to be dirty when you do it God's way. It's private, but it's not a secret, right? And so speaking of it in such a way, it's perhaps a little socially awkward because of just, I don't know, this, that, or the other. But the reality of it is that it's something God made. It's a great reminder that God didn't have to make sex fun. He didn't have to make sex anything. We could have procreated by an agreement with a handshake if God had designed it that way. That's the idea, is that there's nothing about it that can be bad because God made it that way. Now, just like everything else, I love the way it's put. Fire in the fireplace is good. Fire in the living room is bad. And so you can take a good thing, but put it in the wrong place and in the wrong way, and you just took a good thing and you made it bad. And that's what's been done with sex. So the idea here, though, is the proverbist, if that's not a word, it is now, right? The proverbist, he's taking something and he's looking at it in the lens of God's way, of doing it the right way. And so as he looks at this subject of sex, the way of a man with a virgin, he said, it's a beautiful thing that two become one flesh. And it's fascinating. In fact, at a pastor's conference, I was teaching on a little bit of a Song of Solomon and marriage and some of even just the pictures, actually. And when I taught Song of Solomon, it's my favorite book. And it's not because of the sex in Song of Solomon, but because of the intimacy with Christ that the sex in Song of Solomon represents. Because that's the idea of Song of Solomon, is it takes a passionate relationship full of physical intimacy between a bride and groom, but the whole thing is supposed to be a picture of our intimacy with Christ. And so after I taught on this, even then another pastor, he came up and he even added some more details. And it's like, yeah, these are kind of like uncomfortable details about sex to talk about. But if you think about it, and he went on to show, like, think about this and think about that and he starts pointing out that there's actually a lot of symbolism in sexual intercourse, which God created intentionally for a purpose. And so it is in books like Song of Solomon, for people who don't get weirded out because we're talking about, the S word, well, then you could actually learn a lot of cool things. And the idea is that those ties with intimacy with God. And so one more time, Proverbs 18 and 19, 3 things are too wonderful for me. Yes, 4 of which I do not understand. The way of an eagle in the air, the serpent on the rock, the ship in the midst of the sea, and the way of a man with a virgin. And so he puts above all those things this idea of sexual intimacy and intercourse, how there is supposed to be beauty there. There's supposed to be goodness there. And maybe I'll close on this last thought, is just like everything else in this world, just like everything else in this world, right? Now, what the enemy meant for evil, God can turn it for the good. But the opposite's also true. Just like everything else in this world, what God intended for good, the enemy has done everything he can to turn it for evil. And I I would dare to say that the things which God Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, Lord of the universe, what God intended for good, the more the enemy has tried to corrupt all the more. And I would throw out there for you that marriage, parenting, but marriage is quintessential to parenting. After our relationship with God, our relationship with our spouse was supposed to be the next most important thing in our lives. And sexual intimacy is a part of that. And so the enemy has tried his best to twist, to morph, to change that into something not good. And so by doing so, he's found ways for people to do it 1,000 different ways outside of what God has planned. And because of all that, you see, because of the abuse of sex outside of God's plan, what it has also done is it has brought negativity into God's plan. And so it's no longer something that's enjoyable for both parties and shared between husband and wife, but it becomes something that becomes a problem in a marriage. And it ought not be. I remember recently hearing a friend at a conference quote a famous Christian, and I can't remember who they quoted. But, they say that Satan tries his best to get Christians to have sex as much as possible before marriage and as little as possible in marriage. Once again, just trying to ruin everything from what God has planned. So anyway, what a fun detour today was, right? But like I said earlier, in case you came in late, if we're not going to talk about it here, then I don't know where we're supposed to talk about it, right? If we're not going to talk about it in light of God's word, in light of what the Bible has taught, and I only scratched the surface because there's a whole lot of questions that no one ever wants to ask because it's so embarrassing. But there are actually biblical answers of right and wrong and what God's design is and God's plan is. And that's beyond the scope of where I was going today. And so I'm wrapping up here in verse 19 of Proverbs 30. But the reality is that it's a subject worth understanding, what God's plan is and what God's purpose is. Where is it? Let's see here. Parables, Proverbs, Yeah. I actually had a friend recommend this book, Holy Sex, Song of Solomon by Michael Pearl. Quite fascinating. I got quite a few Song of Solomon commentaries, but that book actually goes through Song of Solomon and tries to actually dig up, some of God's purpose and intents and stuff like that. So, worth a read. Recommended by Daniel Robertson. I'll throw him under the bus in case you don't like the book. But him and his wife have come down and done marriage conferences at our church before. And so people, I appreciate their opinion greatly. All right. You guys have a great day. I'll catch you guys tomorrow at 6:45. See you then.